In this episode of Voice of the Sea, we travel to the Gulf of Mexico to meet up with Florida Sea Grant researchers and partners and learn about coastal rehabilitation work, farming clams, oysters, and sponges. These filter feeders are helping to clean the water, provide nursery habitat, and protect coastal areas from erosion and storm damage. We start off in Cedar Key with Florida Sea Grant's Leslie Sturmer, who is leading a new wave of clam farming. Right away, we jumped on Leslie's boat to watch clammers harvest and then process their clams for sale. Leslie, where are we right now?
So you're in Cedar Key, Florida, on the west coast in what's referred to as the Big Bend area of Florida. We're heading east to the Dog Island aquaculture use zone, and then Dog Island is broken up into 2-acre parcels, and we're heading right in the midst of all that lease acreage. The annual rental fee for using this land is a little over $50 per acre per year. So you can make a living on a small footprint. This is a big agricultural county. You go inland and you need much more acreage to farm peanuts or watermelon to make a living. Our coastline is fringed with mangrove islands, oyster reefs, salt marshes, very rural, isolated, small, coastal, what used to be fishing communities. Cedar Key is now called a clamming community.
And talk to me about this clam farming that happens here.
So clam farming is relatively a new aquaculture industry here for Cedar Key. Started just 30 years ago. So in just a short time, we are now the leading producer of hard clams in the state of Florida.
How does the clam go from the aquaculture side to actually being out in the Gulf where it's harvested?
It is all hatchery produced seed. And we have private sector commercial hatcheries throughout the state of Florida that probably provide over 500 million seed per year to our growers.
That's pretty incredible for a small area. I understand like less than 800 people live in Cedar Key, and you produce 90% of the clams in Florida.
Right.
That's amazing.
It is an amazing story.
And about how many clam farmers do you have here in Cedar Key?
We have 180 certified clam growers operating out of this island community. There's about 1,000 acres of state-owned submerged lands dedicated to clam farms.
Would you mind wearing the microphone?
No.
You'd like to? Tell me about clam, like how'd you get into it?
My grandpa was in it, and then my dad, and now I'm part of it.
And why do you love it?
I'm my own boss. I can do whatever I want, basically.
This premier clam work skiff is based on a modification of the traditional net fishing boat, which had an open transom, obviously, so you could bring your gill nets in with your fish or catch. But it makes sense also for bringing in your clam bags. But the unique feature of this design for this area is that the outboard motor or kicker is up at the bow. Clams are benthic or bottom dwelling, so they have to live in the bottom. And that's why we use a polyester mesh material for the gear type. It's flexible and it allows the clams to bury into the bottom with the mesh. Those bags being pulled up off the bottom are anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds with all that accumulated sediments. You can't put any more on there?
I could, but not today.
They're doing two things today. They're harvesting the marketable product, as well as the smaller mesh bag you see coming up here, being pulled up, is the nursery seed. They'll work on those this afternoon, transfer them to the grow-out bag, and then take them back out tomorrow morning to plant. They're going to sink the boat today, I believe.
How many clams do you think they have on their boat, Leslie?
Well, you know, in part because the survival was much less due to the mortality endured from the hurricane. They're having to pull more bags to get their market orders. I don't know how many more they could put on that boat. The hard clam industry here in Cedar Key was kind of on a good track, you know, pretty established. But over the past 2 years, we've seen with increasing summer temperatures, heat stress on our crops that are particularly getting ready to harvest in the summer, We're seeing increased mortality of that size. And then we were just hard hit with a hurricane, a Category 3 hurricane that hit on August 30th, 2023, 11-foot tidal surge, resulting in unprecedented damage to this clam industry. So I've been working with the industry in its recovery efforts and also looking to see what techniques or management practices we may need to modify in order to mitigate losses in the summer due to increased heat. So when we've had mortality, such as what occurred after Hurricane Idalia, the clam shells, the dead shell, are still in the bag. So that first processing step, called tumbling, helps to clean up the clams, the live clams, and the shell breaks down and then will fall out. This is a rural area, so a lot of the shell will just go to fill dirt roads and so forth.
We've got eight bags in this roll right here, all connected together. We're about to throw our scuba gear on here in a little bit. We're gonna go plant them. These clams right here are 4 millimeter in size. I got these from our hatchery down south last night actually. And we're gonna grow these in these bags for about 3 to 4 months right here. And then they'll be transplanted into what we call the grow out bag. They can be in that grow out bag for anywhere on an average of 12 months to 18 months, depending on the size of the clams that you're growing it for your market. We got roughly about 2.5 million nursery seed that we're gonna be going out and planting today. So to give you an idea, each one of those boats has about probably about 100,000 grow out clams on them right now. So this right here is equivalent to 25 boat loads. Basically 25 boat loads, and 18 months from now is what you'll get back out of this right here.
Next, we catch up with Florida Sea Grant's Savannah Berry to learn about living shoreline systems, which are designed to protect coastal areas from erosion and rising seas.
Florida is a highly developed state, and we have sea level rise and storms, and both of those things drive a lot of coastal erosion. And that leads people to want to do things like put up walls and rocks along the shoreline. But there's actually a greener and a softer way that we can manage many of our shorelines in Florida using habitats like oyster reefs, marshes, and mangroves that are adapted to deal with these coastal pressures and processes. And so living shorelines are really mini habitat restorations meant to help protect property and infrastructure behind them. And we have several of those projects here in Cedar Key that help demonstrate that concept. We have lots of different options for people to build reefs depending on the site context and their preference for aesthetics and what oysters like to grow on. And then behind the oyster reefs, we have to choose native plants that can survive in that area. So whether that be marshes or mangroves, and it really depends on the elevation of the shoreline behind which of those plant communities are most suitable. So it's a little bit of ecology and a little bit of engineering. The reefs at Airport Road are built out of a material called reef balls. They're deployed with a barge, actually a small barge and crane, and a crew of people deploy them. They're manufactured right here in Florida, but they've actually been installed, I think, in like 80 countries around the world. And the oysters actually recruit onto it because they spawn their larvae out into the water, and then they're just floating out there in the water for certain periods of time, waiting to find suitable substrate to settle on. As far as what lives in the oyster reefs, I mean, the oysters create the basis, and they create very complex structure that a lot of other animals live in. And so some of those come and go with the tides. As the tide goes out, the fish obviously have to leave with the tide, but there are many, many other crabs and mollusks, snails, other things that live on the oysters and even prey upon the oysters, as well as birds that come to either prey on the things that are preying on the oysters. And so they build a very complex food web pretty rapidly with that structure. And so for people that may want to be able to just throw a cast net off their dock and get some bait before they head out fishing, or maybe they enjoy bird watching or other things like that, it does provide an additional amenity to your shoreline. In addition to that just pure protection, you also have really a front seat to nature.
You had an opportunity to real world test your living shorelines recently with the hurricane that came through.
Yes, unfortunately, Hurricane Idalia was record storm surge levels here in Cedar Key that we hadn't seen before. And even though the living shorelines were constructed more as habitat enhancement projects and to deal with smaller scale everyday storms, we actually were able to measure up to 20% wave energy attenuation even at the very highest water levels during that hurricane. Next steps for that research are to try to understand what does it mean for structures behind if you attenuate 20% of wave energy? Are there certain tweaks or changes we could make to our design so that we could attenuate even more energy for the unfortunate eventuality of a future storm? Generally, living shorelines do become stronger over time. They're kind of the weakest they will ever be when they're first installed, before the plants have had a chance to coalesce and those root systems have really had a chance to knit together and the oysters kind of cement together the building blocks of the reef. There is a vulnerable period in the beginning, but they just really get stronger over time. And that's in contrast to armoring approaches, which generally get weaker over time and do need more maintenance as their life goes on, and also cost more to install.
The University of Hawaii's Sea Grant College program focused on Hawaii's coasts and its communities through sustainable development, safe seafood supply, sustainable coastal tourism, hazard resilience, and healthy coastal ecosystems. Hawaii's Sea Grant.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're in Tampa Bay, learning about farming clams for food and for ecosystem restoration. We'll do some clamming with DJ Strott of Joe Island Clams and Florida Sea Grant's Angela Collins, our guide to the Tampa Bay area.
We're actually in the Tampa Bay estuary. We're in the southeast corner of Tampa Bay, one of the most productive gulfs in the world. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program oversees the health and water quality conditions inside the bay, including our seagrass meadows, as well as mangrove coverage and oyster reef habitats. We have a lot of species of fish that utilize seagrass as habitat when they're babies. Those baby fish go out, they go into deeper water, and they support really important commercial and recreational fisheries for the entire state of Florida, including the rest of the Gulf of Mexico. Seagrass is also incredibly important for sediment stabilization, right? It's a true marine plant, which means it has a root system, and that root system keeps sand and mud and sediment in place. We produce a lot of clams here in the state, and a lot of that is done north of here in the Cedar Key region, but we also have clam farmers in Tampa Bay, as well as Charlotte Harbor, and also on the east coast of Florida in the Indian River Lagoon. And these shellfish farmers are probably one of the greenest agricultural enterprises out there. These little filter feeders are making the water cleaner than it was when they got there, and then once they're big enough, they can be removed for commercial sale for people to eat, or they can also be used in different restoration efforts where people are purchasing clams to use as environmental mitigation strategies. With increased development in Florida, there's a lot more nutrient inputs into our water bodies. There's more and more political and general public support for things that can clean the water, both at an upstream and a downstream capacity. And filter feeders are one of the tools in the toolbox that you can put into the water and remove some of the things that cause problems.
And you're born and raised in this area.
Yeah.
What changes have you seen over time?
People, lots of people. As time goes on, there's more and more development. And so this is another reason why I like the shellfish story, because as we continue to build and coastal development increases, we're really impacting like our land's ability to filter water, right? Because you're hardening the shorelines and you're removing the dirt and the land cover that used to be there to filter things before it reached the estuary. Making sure that we pay attention to sustainable coastal development and managing upstream nutrient sources, and then also doing the best we can to increase the number of filter feeders that are out here in our system are all steps that we can take to help improve and help try to stave off some of the things that we see happening in other estuaries around the globe.
We are actually clam farmers in Tampa Bay. We grow our native clam for restoration. We also grow the food grade clam for restaurants, wholesalers, and retailers.
And what are we going to be doing today?
Today we're taking you guys out to go pull some restoration clams, the campies, and show you how they grow and how we grow them in the water and what we do with them afterwards. Right here should be some bags. Right over here. You want to go down?
Okay.
Today we're pulling adult clams. They're about 1 inch wide. They've been in the water for about 2 years, and we've grown them since about the size of like a pencil eraser, number 2 pencil eraser, 4 millimeter. And we're gonna pull them, clean them, and then count them.
So there's sort of a different goal in terms of restoration versus eating. For eating, you want these sort of 8 month, 1.5 years, 2 years, smaller, tender clams.
Yep.
And then for restoration, you're growing the native, slower growing clams, and you want them to get big so they
reproduce.
And about how many clams or pounds of clams are you harvesting per week?
It depends on this time of year. For our food grade clams, we do about 30 to 50 bushels a week. A bushel is just your standard fishing industry basket. Some people call it a basket. We call it a bushel. You fill it with clams, weighs about 55 pounds.
Oh, pretty big.
Yeah, and they hold about, adult clams, about 900 clams, adult clams clean. The first 5 years, we killed millions of clams learning how to do it, because how they do it in Cedar Key in South Florida, it doesn't work here. So we had to find our own method of how to grow clams here. We have clear water, so we have bifiling really bad. Sea squirts and eelgrass and all kinds of stuff get on the bags and grow, which is a good thing, but not for the clams.
And what is your favorite thing about clam farming?
I love farming, period, whether on land or on sea. And this gives me an excuse to be on the water every day. And I think help the environment. I mean, all we do is put clams in the water. We don't feed them. We don't do anything. They're taking, the food out of the water, filtering it, and putting the good stuff back in it. So I think it's a win-win. We're not tearing up the ground. We're not using fertilizer, as other parts of farming would do. So I think it's great. I just like being on the water. I really do.
We are looking for a few heroes, mentors, trailblazers, innovators, a passion to change lives, spark curiosity, open hearts, and awaken minds, help students answer the question, who am I? This could be your calling, but this is no job. It's the journey of a lifetime. Be a hero. Be a teacher.
You're watching Voice of the Sea. We're in Hernando Beach with Florida Sea Grant's Brittany Hall-Scharf and Fisher Greg Fenton, learning about the Sponge Research Program. We head out on Greg's boat to take a look at the Sponge Research site. How are sponges important to this community around Hernando?
The underwater habitat off of our coast is a big estuary, so we have a lot of seagrasses, but we also have natural hard bottom, which consists of a lot of those sponges. Sponges are important because they not only clean our water, but they provide habitat for a lot of the fish and invertebrates out there. So even the small ones, the big ones, gives them somewhere to hide from predators. Sponges are filter feeders, so they filter out all the tiny particles and algae and microbes from the water column, and sometimes even viruses too, and eat those, and then the water's nice and clean. We have a lot of crystal clear water coming out of our aquifer, out of the river, and it meets where we're at in the Gulf of Mexico, and so we have a lot of clear water, which lets us have the seagrass beds that we have here, because we were able to get the light through the water, and the seagrass can photosynthesize and supports a big fishery here. All right, so I guess we'll gear up and we'll stick our faces in the water to try and find these sponges. This sponge project started 2 years ago. They took cuttings off of sponges that live further offshore, and then they brought them inshore, and then we got to see those today where they dispersed them among the 5 different nursery sites. So when we took the sponges from offshore, we made cuttings because they can reproduce asexually. They did 1,000 cuttings, so 200 for each species, and then zip tied them to the bricks and anchored them down. They each have a little number, so if one dies, we can then pull the zip tie off when we know what species it was. All of the species that you saw today are local species. They just went a few miles offshore, harvested from the species that we have in the area, and then brought them inshore to the little sandy areas.
It was just really neat to go down and see the different, I think I saw 3 different types of sponges. Can you describe those for me?
So you saw sheep's wool. So that was the more rounder ones that had the holes in them. You saw the vase sponges today. Those were like little flowers that were branching off the bricks. And then you saw the purple ones that were a darker purple in color that were more tubular, closer to the bricks. They were the smaller of the 3 that we saw today.
And do you measure them over time? Or are you trying to see how fast they grow?
They've been going in and seeing the survival rate. So we did have one species that didn't do very well. And then they've also been watching how fast they grow. So then the next steps will be to mix those blocks up to see if, by mixing the different species, if they grow faster, if their survival increases, as well as they will pile them up and lift them off the ground to see if that helps kind of get them closer to more food.
How did you partner with Greg to do this research, or do you do other work with him?
Greg participates in a lot of our extension projects within our office. He's been an active volunteer for 4 or 5 years now. Because I'm the boots on the ground, it was my role to connect the community to the project. So that is where I reached out to Greg, who is our boat captain for the day, and he volunteers his time to help commute everybody out to those 5 nursery sites and us do our checks each quarter or however often we need to.
How important is it to have people in the community like Greg that are willing to volunteer their time, volunteer their boat?
Just for this very project, if we didn't have Greg taking us out on his boat, it probably wouldn't have happened. He saved a lot of money on the project that we didn't have very much money to begin with. And we've learned a lot of things, and we're going to expand it and bring some students in. By having his buy-in and his support, we were able to do projects like this.
Tell me about your spearfishing company.
We go offshore for 1 to 2 days at a time and harvest reef fish and bring them back, sell them to the local markets and the restaurants.
And what kind of fish do you spear?
Mammerjack, grouper, hogfish, any kind of reef or pelagics that's in season or that we're allowed to shoot. Fish has changed tremendously over the years. Hopefully we're in a rebuilding phase right now, and hopefully we can get back to what we were 10 or 15 years ago. I think the benefit to the sponge program is help force some rejuvenation for some of that stuff. I mean, everything gets pressure, whether you fish or you sponge or you scallop. It all gets pressure, right? And unfortunately for Nature Coast and Cedar Key, we get a lot of that pressure. Everyone comes here to fish, everyone comes here to scallop. Programs like this just help rebuild that. I know the sponges and the oysters and all this stuff are important for us as people that are living on the water. And if we don't start protecting that area, we're not going to have anything to fish out of or to live around. Knowledge and data is the most important thing. So if you can participate in programs like this and other things that have some validity to it, I think that's all great stuff to help support our cause, and our livelihood, really. So get out on water and participate.
You can get involved. Sign up for a restoration workday or join a research project in your area. Learn more at voiceofthesea.org. Follow us on social media at Voice of the Sea TV. Mahalo for watching Voice of the Sea. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is the dynamic curriculum developed by the University of Hawaii's Curriculum Research and Development Group. The award-winning Fluid Earth and Living Ocean textbooks are now interactive and online. New activities, updated content, and a teacher community. Exploring Our Fluid Earth is now freely available. Find out more at exploringourfluidearth.org.